Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming along, spending an hour and a bit or so with us. This session in the programme is all around inclusivity in a schools context, and I'll be chairing the session. My background is I'm now like an independent languages consultant focusing on EdTech, but prior to that I was a languages teacher. I taught for 13 years at secondary school level and at middle school level, and the last 12 years or so I've been doing training, and before the pandemic around the world, but now mostly via Zoom, so this is very familiar. And I'm very, very honoured to be asked to chair this as well. Thank you to Joe Ford for contacting me and for Naomi Wells for recommending me as well. It's it's a real privilege to be here. So in today's session, we have four speakers live and one recording as well. Lucy Jenkins isn't able to join us today live, but she sent us a video instead. And Claire Guerrara has very kindly offered to come in and answer any questions that we might have, particularly around the international languages in secondary schools in Wales, around mentoring. So that's wonderful. The way we're going to run it, I'm going to introduce each person. Each person is going to speak for about 10 minutes or so. I would love people to write their questions in the chat. If you're going to write a question, can you put the letter Q in front of it to make it really clear to me that you've asked the question? And I will then collect those questions and put them into a Google Doc, which I've got on my second screen here. And at the end of each presentation, I'll put one of the questions that you've asked to the speaker, and then we'll see how much time we have left once everyone's spoken, and we'll open up the discussion to the whole panel from there, if that's okay. That's the way we're going to run it. So first of all, we have Lisa Panford from St Mary's University. We then have Charlotte Ryland from Oxford University and from Stephen Spender Trust, ably abetted with Stacie Allan, also from Stephen Spender Trust. We then have Gitanjali Patel from University of Birmingham and Shadow Heroes. I can't wait to hear more about that. And then we have the video from Lucy Jenkins, as I said, who can't join us today. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Lisa to start off her session on working together to mobilise advancements in decolonising the secondary MFL curriculum. Amazing. So all your questions, please put them in the chat. And if it's to a specific person, can you put the fact that it's to a specific person as well? That'd be really helpful. And I'll then collect them while the speaker is speaking. Over to you, Lisa.
Thanks very much, Joe. Can I just check that you can hear me fine and see my screen?
Yep, all good. All good.
Great. Thank you very much for that. So my name's Lisa Panford. Thank you for the introduction also. My name's Lisa Panford. I am a senior lecturer and course lead of PGC Secondary MFL at St Mary's University. And before that, previous life, I spent 14 years, I round up to 15 years, teaching languages in the secondary school, in secondary schools. It's an absolutely huge privilege to be able to have this opportunity to share the work of our Decolonised Secondary MFL Curriculum Special Interest Group. I'm going to call it SIG for short because it's a mouthful and I've only got 10 minutes. The group was launched by Melina Irvin, who's a practicing secondary teacher based in Bristol, and me, with the support of our professional subject body, that's the Association for Language Learning, or ALL, back in April 2021. And today my plan is to share some of the work that we're currently engaged in the hope that it might be of interest to colleagues in the room who are concerned with anti-racist approaches to languages education and social justice in their classrooms. I'm hoping there may be attendees in this room who might be interested in joining our group on our journey. Please do get in touch, or perhaps you might be willing to share some similar or different perspectives and approaches to equalities work. Our group aims to facilitate dialogue between MFL practitioners in schools, universities, and publishing and assessment services in order to mobilise pedagogical advancements in decolonised curricula. And that is we're really specific and intentional, that is about positive practical impact on our students in the secondary school classroom. I'm really excited to be working with colleagues with such wide-ranging, wide-reaching expertise. And I've included some of their logos on the slide here. Our areas of focus are broadly around increasing and improving representation of multi-ethnic diversity of our target language countries in our resources, development of content relating to target language countries' colonial legacies, amplifying narratives of people of colour in our target language countries, developing questioning frameworks to support students and enhance their critical thinking skills. All of our members subscribe to the benefits of a space for collaborative approaches to making advancements that are meaningful to our young people in school. So at the time of its inception, I should say that at the time of its inception, and actually now, the exact shape of the work and its potential is not entirely defined. We're not entirely sure about the breadth of what can be achieved. The shared understanding between co-founders, the management board and all our members is that the approach is ongoing, and that is sort of echoed here in the words of Naomi Wells, our very own Naomi Wells. Now, to dial back a bit and provide a bit of context to explain why we came to be, we owe huge thanks to colleagues in the MFL teaching community, many of whom are in the room with us now, who fed back after a presentation which is called "What Does an Anti-Racist Decolonised MFL Curriculum Look Like?" I've linked it in the slides here, and perhaps they could be shared after. So that was at Languages World 2021, at the annual conference that's organised by the Association for Language Learning. The presentation didn't make for easy watching. It wasn't an easy view. In it, we highlighted what we saw as the failures of the current MFL curriculum provision to engage with colonial legacies of target language countries and the favouring of Eurocentric cultural examples and literary texts. We also exposed and problematised the tendency in our teaching community towards a diversification of the curriculum as opposed to a decolonised approach. Colleagues were incredibly kind. They reached out through social media and email. We heard from classroom practitioners, academics, publishers, and awarding bodies. And it seemed clear that there was an appetite for pedagogical advancements in this area from practitioners based in a range of professional contexts. So some teachers shared with us that they lacked the confidence to competently teach about colonial legacies and incorporate authentic Black narratives in their lessons, and that they wanted support and training to be able to develop the work that they felt needed to happen in their schemes of work and to their resources and so on. Others said they just weren't afforded the time to do the work. Sorry, I'm not sure why it skipped. A senior colleague who is based at St Mary's University, who's also an ALL trustee, identified that developing the expertise in this area was aligned to our subject body's aims to provide information and professional development to language teachers and serve the wider community. And with her, we submitted a successful application for the launch of our SIC. So that's a bit about our story. At the group's first meeting, we agreed on some guidelines, and we present those in our terms of reference. And we have guidelines around engaging in professional safe space conversations around the issues of race and racism. That was imperative to make sure that conversations were entered into with integrity, that they, it was really important to members that we acknowledge the profound tensions and underpinning power dynamics at play with the work. And we discussed the discomfort around the permission associated with discussing race in a critical and honest way, and agreed that while it's imperative that we pay particular attention to people of colour, the voices of people of colour, to gain understanding, ours can't be the only voices in the conversation, because that effectively reinforces the burden of that conversation and action on people of colour. And moreover, it effectively serves to downgrade the profound role that people who identify as white play in discussions around race and racism. We discussed a number of practical issues around meetings, like we ensured that the topics we discussed were, where possible, aligned to the priorities of the school calendar. So, for example, we made sure that, for example, it would be in September, we have the European Day of Languages and October Black History Month. And that was to provide timely support to colleagues in schools. The benefits of this collaborative work, I think impact of discussions is kind of a difficult thing to quantify, right? But it was really very clear that colleagues really found discussions meaningful in terms of their own professional context, particularly the opportunity to engage in reflective space. There were opportunities for colleagues to collaborate and network to build relationships across sectors, but with colleagues with aligned values, and that was quite exciting. And also, as is shared by our colleagues here in assessment and publishing, the discussions actually informed their next steps in terms of planning, resources and assessments. So really a joined up holistic approach. There have been a number of tangible and exciting developments, not least the creation of a webpage, through which we share various things like whole-based school initiatives. We've got reading and research, training resources, a resource bank for all languages, and yes, some whole school project work. For example, Rachel Wright at Ellen Wilkinson School for Girls, she shares her Decolonised European Day of Languages. It's a whole school initiative aimed at disrupting the centering of white narratives in discussions around languages in Europe, as well as so-called European languages in the global context. We've welcomed opportunities to develop and deliver workshops and an ITT seminar around decolonising approaches to MFL resources specifically, and attendees' comments reflect just the real desire to continue having these conversations more than anything, I think. In collaboration with Pearson, we have launched a series of resources as well, and these aim to illuminate the hidden stories of marginalised people and cultures. SIG members have authored and been paid for decolonised content, which is freely accessible by teachers and learners. And while this project is just really kicked off, initial feedback suggests that the published resources have been received positively by colleagues in school, and that they're being used. I could maybe share some of so here's a resource that I authored, which aims to theorise language and race in an accessible way for Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 pupils. So in it, I highlight some of the issues around having conversations about race and the language around race in French, German and Spanish, and their activities in French, German and Spanish to support their understanding around that. Here's our colleague Melina Irvin and the co-founder who explores the concepts of cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation in the context of Mexico and Mexican culture. Here's our Germanist specialist, Ro Henry Grant, our SIG member, who explores the Islamic influence on German culture and language. And this resource was published in time for Ramadan this year. So again, the idea is that it's timely support for teachers in schools. So next steps, as our members are collectively exploring continually, it's ongoing, how we improve our work and how we can develop our work. Things that we're looking at exploring include how do we ensure that our work is sustainable and supportive of colleagues' workloads, and the financial case. Claire Ross spoke to that very powerfully earlier on, ensuring that the burden of this work doesn't fall on people who already have humongous workloads, and particularly on people of colour. It's the burden and also the psychological burden of carrying the work. We are looking at how we can collectively work with colleagues from other subjects, history and English. We had a really exciting opportunity to contribute to a collaborative article, which hopefully is going to be published by BIRA. And that was with a collective of teachers from the Decolonising Bristol network. So it's cross subjects. Yes, I watch this space. Hopefully that gets published. So I'm really interested in exploring ways that we can connect with colleagues across other curriculum subjects. Skipped again. And moreover, a deeper exploration of our blind spots as language practitioners. Do we have assumptions around our own perceptions of our international outlook that means that our advancement in anti-racist practice and decolonised practice is hindered? So we're looking to explore that as well, and obviously to continue strengthening our opportunities for teacher support through CPD and ITT programmes and our schools networks. Looking ahead, we're really interested in highlighting research carried out in universities by a new generation of linguists and educators who are experts in Black target language narratives and colonial legacies and multi-ethnic contexts. And we really look forward to strengthening our existing collaboration with the Institute of Modern Languages Research through potentially an application for a collaborative doctoral award, and really work towards this long-term legacy to bring about greater awareness of colonialism and discourses around race and racism that Joseph Ford speaks to there. I've linked some of the bits and pieces I mentioned earlier, like our webpage, an article that centres race and racism in secondary MFL, the original conference paper, and also our Pearson resources are all linked on these slides. Thanks so much for listening. I should also say that this is key, actually. This is really, we really recognise that there are glaring gaps in our work. This is really an ongoing process, and we really welcome opportunities to discuss those gaps and to further and to enhance our approach. Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Lisa. That was really amazing. We've had a couple of questions that have come in. The first question is a very practical one. How would one get involved with the special interest group for ALL? What would be the steps to do that?
Tell me now, and I'll write your one on the list.
So if anyone
you can
wants to
send me an email. I'll
series.
put my email in the chat, and anybody who's interested in joining, please do join the discussions. They're often very lively. There are some members in the room right now, and I hope that they would support me in saying that discussions are often very lively, thought-provoking.
Superb. Right, I can see that lots of people have asked questions right at the end, but that's all good. It's a bit more helpful if you could put them about halfway through the talk, so I've got time to actually collect them and put them in the Google Doc. But that's all good. We'll do one more, a bit longer question, if that's okay. So we've got a question. Thank you for a wonderful talk, Lisa. I would be interested to know a bit more about how you ensure that the voices of people of colour are foregrounded without the bulk of the labour falling onto them. Is this a difficult balance to achieve? That's a great question. What would you say? You talked a little bit about sort of workload earlier, didn't you? What sort of practical steps would you suggest on managing foregrounding the voice of people of colour without the bulk of the labour falling onto them?
It's a really important question. And I'm not sure I should accept the burden in having the answer for it, if I'm going to be honest with you. I think that's something that we're working on. I certainly don't have the answer. It's a tricky thing, isn't it? Because I think when you feel, I think as particularly teachers, right, there's so much that we do beyond our job description. When we feel passionately driven about areas of social justice, and we've got we're feeling intentional about our anti-racist approaches. You're highlighting something that I'm navigating and negotiating myself. It's a personal and professional question. I don't know the answer to. I don't know how we, as people of colour, manage the psychological burden of leading this work. I think it's really important, as I said earlier, that we centre the voices of people of colour in discussions around race, but that is not to downgrade the really essential role that white people play in those discussions.
Fantastic. But I mean, on a very practical level, for say a head of department who's already very busy getting ready for the summer term, has to plan for the new GCSE, what sort of practical tips would you suggest to that person to try and, as you said, let me think, to contribute to the long-term legacy? What sort of practical examples would you suggest?
Yeah, I am acutely sensitive to the immense pressures that colleagues in schools are under. It's, in languages, just this week, they have been, I know, working flat out for speaking assessments, continually changing curricula and exam specifications. We're looking at another revision of that. I don't believe that the burden should fall on teachers, individual teachers in isolation, or departments in isolation, to do the work that needs to happen. And part of working collectively is trying to work out how we can best have some impact on that, so that the responsibility doesn't fall on individuals. It's a wider thing. And also in terms of decolonising, it doesn't just sit within the curriculum, does it? We have an issue in terms of decolonising languages. Michael Sang spoke to that earlier, decolonising the provision of languages, right? So the hierarchization, didn't say it, the putting in order, wrongly, of languages, right? And the perceived sort of status ascribed to Spanish, German, and French over our other languages. So even outside of the curriculum, we've got broader problems. The very real teacher shortage, black teacher shortage, felt particularly acutely in our subject, disproportionately so. It's a matter of public, public record, the black teacher shortage overall, but it's, I think, particularly stark in languages. There are broader issues. My advice to a head of department who is overworked and not undervalued by us, but by the system, it would be to connect with colleagues through our group, and we will work together at trying to make meaningful advancements in this area. It has to be a collective approach, I think. There are no simple tick box steps. I think it would be helpful if there were, but I'm not sure that there are. We can start by looking at our resources and seeing whether we have positive representation in our resources, the ones that we create. in the resources that we use, we can ensure that we're having conversations that with the resources that we use, if they aren't, if they don't represent inclusivity, then we can have conversations that frame that and invite our pupils to invite our young people to question it. That doesn't look like my family. Does it look like your family? No, I wonder why that's been, and how does that contribute to your understanding of what a Spanish speaker looks like, or what a Spanish family looks like, and how does that correlate with, but to have those conversations, you need a degree of confidence and time. And those are things that we're working within the limits of sort of the constraints of teachers being really time poor, but also of the fact that I think some people feel, and rightly so, under-prepared to have those conversations.
Yeah, but I think you've given us a great starting point, and I think obviously people can get involved with the SIG. They can think about in the future when designing new materials to make sure, if they're not already, to make sure that they do recognise Black narratives and decolonizing the curriculum. Absolutely, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. You've given us a really nice sort of starting point for the discussion. That's lovely, Lisa. Thank you. So we're now going to move on to Charlotte Ryland and Stacie Allan, who are going to be talking about creative translation for inclusion, Stephen Spender Trust and Translation Exchange programs in secondary schools. So I'll hand over to Charlotte now, if that's okay, to introduce your segment.
Hi, thanks very much. Can everybody see my PowerPoint?
Yeah, all good.
Excellent. Thanks so much for inviting Stacie and me to speak today. It's so nice to be on this panel with amazing projects that I'm all really fond of. It was nice to see those quotations. Thank you, Lisa. I've absolutely loved being part of the SIG. It's really enriched my thinking in this field, and also contacts and sort of access to resources and so on. So I'm really looking forward to continuing with that work. So Stacie and I are going to talk today about two organisations which I've called here translation outreach organisations. So the Stephen Spender Trust is a charity that I've been running since 2018, but it's been around for about 25 years now. And the Translation Exchange is a project at Oxford University that I set up in 2018. And they both use translation as a way of enriching language learning. And one of the main ways we do that is by getting translation and what we call creative translation into schools. Here's an example of some picture of some Oxford undergraduates doing a creative translation workshop in a primary school. And this is one of my favourite pictures of the work that we do, partly because everybody's looking so keen, but especially that they're looking at that question, does anyone here know more than one language? And there are so many hands up. There were more than 50% of this particular class that spoke another language at home. And in fact, the teacher told us afterwards that there were even more that didn't put their hands up, which is an issue that we're trying to address. So what we're going to do in our 10 minutes is we're going to just talk very quickly through 5 premises, sort of the foundations on which we're building our thinking around inclusion in creative translation. And then we're going to give 5 examples of projects that we've run and how they relate to inclusivity. It's going to be quite whistle-stop, I think, but we'll see. So, firstly, languages should be the site of inclusion on the curriculum. But, I mean, this is pretty obvious, but I think we have to start here. Languages are a way of exploring history, geography, literature, film from multiple cultures. It ought to be an open goal, really, but as we know, traditionally it's been the exact opposite. It's been an extremely exclusive discipline because it's focused on white, middle-class, Eurocentric culture with content that appears to appeal more to girls than to boys. So there are lots of areas of exclusion there, which we've been thinking about in our work. Stacie.
So our second premise is that UK schools have been becoming increasingly multilingual over the past 20 years, but the language curriculum hasn't capitalised on this change. And what this lack of recognition leads to is a hierarchisation of languages, where those pupils who learn languages in schools, and those languages are called modern, and speaking a modern language is really an asset. Whereas those pupils who speak another language at home or with their families, those languages are called heritage or community or diaspora languages. And that's the fact of speaking English as a second language is often seen as a deficit, something that needs remedied. In our work, however, we see multilingual schools and classrooms as places of huge potential. And through our activities, multilingual pupils can develop self-confidence, can gain validation in their language skills, and really use it for creativity, amongst other things.
And I think it's not either or. So that photo that I showed you, where it starts with inviting people to share their languages. That workshop goes on to translate a picture book from Mexico, so in Spanish. So there's both things are happening at the same time. What MFL and EAL, if we're going to use our acronyms. Languages can be more inclusive if they privilege culture and creativity over communication and function. So this is the idea that some pupils may never see themselves traveling to France to order a baguette, or to Germany to ask their way to the station, and that fact can be demotivating for pupils. Whereas all pupils from primary age onwards can engage in rich cultural experiences in the classroom if culture and creativity are in the foreground of the work that they're doing. This is not instead of grammar and vocabulary. This is not saying let's all be creative and cultural and never mind about the function and the communication and the structures. The work that we do with creative translation shows that culture can be the context and the motivation for learning those structures and vocabulary. So it's where you start rather than where you end. It suits different types of learners. Some research that one of our colleagues, Katrina Barnes, has done has showed that it can appeal in particular to learners who struggle with the sort of memory test side of language learning, and that it's very motivating for those learners. And it includes all learners in cultural learning. So it's not saying that culture is only for the best linguists, it's only for those who make it to GCSE and even to A-level, almost the reward for going through those years of learning grammar, learning vocab lists. It recognises that international culture can and should be accessible for everybody from primary age onwards.
And I think another thing that our work does is it sort of puts culture into modern languages. If you look at the syllabus for Latin and Greek, it's very much explicit there that those languages are learning those languages about culture, is about literature, whereas modern languages syllabus, the curriculum is all about communication. So it's putting the culture really at the forefront of modern languages. And our fourth premise is that including English language via creative translation is beneficial, as long as it recognises and welcomes difference within English itself. So our work really moves away from notions of equivalence or right or wrong in translation, really embrace the fact that there are many different and valid ways to say things, whether standard or non-standard. And for us, that difference, that variety, it's a real source of creativity. So creative translation shows and accepts that all English speakers speak differently. And it gets us on the way to reflecting on why that is, why we might say things in slightly different ways from our peers or our parents or our teachers.
And finally, creative translation, you may not be surprised to hear, facilitates all of the above and provides inclusive content. So what we mean here is the idea that it's a sort of standard practice in the language learning classroom to describe your home or to talk about a holiday that you've had or to describe the area that you live in. for lots of reasons, that can be a really exclusive and demotivating activity that pupils don't want to engage in, and it's kind of weird that it's such a central feature of language learning. So what creative translation does, by bringing in and making accessible cultural texts from outside of the UK, it provides content for the same grammar and structures and vocabulary to be taught and learned and practiced, but in a way that is much more inclusive. An example here is a wonderful graphic novel called Stacie, which is written in French and has been published in translation in English, written by a writer from the Ivory Coast and set in the Ivory Coast. And that's a workshop that's a text that we use a lot in our workshops. And it can, for example, facilitate an exercise on describing a house, except for it's not your house or your bedroom, it's Akisi's bedroom, which is, it's kind of more interesting as a cultural artifact because it's somewhere different, as well as not requiring the young people to kind of talk about their own experiences, which they might not want to share with the class. So that's the sort of the foundations that we've built this work on and that inform what we do. We're now just going to give you some glimpses into how this works in practice. So firstly, long before I joined the Stephen Spender Trust, the charity started doing work in schools. It started in 2010 with a project called Translation Nation, which was for whole primary classes in super diverse schools in East London. It was about sharing, translating and performing folk tales from diaspora languages, for want of a better term. Families were involved, parents and grandparents of the children. And that gave rise to a project called The Big Translate, which is about translating picture books from different cultures and then performing them at the end. And I think, so this early iteration of our work was a really good response to that, our second premise about recognizing and including languages that are spoken outside the classroom.
So building on the success, particularly of Translation Nation, Stephen Spender Trust wanted to extend the geographic reach of this work and develop Translators in Schools, a professional development program that trained over 100 translators and teachers. And through that program, the Trust refined the kind of structured workshop model, and it's a model that we still use today. It's a model that's replicable, it's scalable, and most importantly, it's accessible to all through using support like glossaries and other resources. And this model has enormous potential for inclusivity. So for example, the textual analysis required for translation, it really leads to critical thinking about how the text is constructed, who is speaking, those kind of dynamics within the text. And simple creative writing exercises, which kind of round off our workshop, such as rewriting the text from another perspective, can lead to a decentering and a focus on other people within the text. And to give you just the brief example of how this works, we developed a poetry workshop on Fernando Pessoa's Mar Português. And this poem explores the human cost of Portugal's conquering of the sea and really expresses sadness. But when we analyze this poem, it really makes us question who Pessoa is writing about, who is he sad about? And then if we consider other perspectives that this poem might be written from, we are left thinking, it really highlights who else might have been affected by these voyages at sea. And so we get a really different perspective on this poem through translating it. One of our current projects is creative translation in the classroom. And this project partners translators and teachers for a whole school year. And in each term, there's an activity. When we train our translators, we really encourage them to consider carefully their sources, reflecting on where the their language, the language they'll be using is spoken, where that source comes from, and the relationship between the author and the subject. In the photo here, you'll see the results of a workshop on Haitian Christmas lanterns. So at the top, it says, I think, text in French. So there's the original French text, which is the instructions for how to create one of these paper lanterns that is made in Haiti at Christmas. At the bottom, you have the instructions, which have been translated into English by the pupils. And then in the middle are the paper lanterns that pupils made, having translated the instructions. And what I really like about this activity is how it shows pupils doing language. They're not just reading a text about a far off country, but they're actively engaging with its culture.
Can I go on, Stacie?
Yeah, sorry, I forgot my last time, but go on.
So I think we've overrun our 10 minutes. So I'm just going to very quickly tell you about two prizes that we run. One, Stephen Spender Prize, is run by the Stephen Spender Trust. Then there's a prize called the Anthea Bell Prize for Young Translators. Both of these are about bringing the activity that we've been describing, so creative translation, into schools without there needing to be a translator in the classroom. So it's about making this happen more often and just making the whole thing more sustainable. The Stephen Spender Prize is about translating any poem out of any language into English. And we've done a lot of work in recent years on moving this away from the traditional languages that are taught in schools and putting what again I've called diaspora languages and MFL languages on an equal footing. We have annual spotlights so far on Polish, Urdu, and this year Romanian. So there's kind of extra resources and workshops for those for that language. And then the Anthea Bell Prize is similar, except for it's more MFL focused. French, German, Italian, Mandarin and Spanish are the languages that we offer it in at the moment. And we're working at the moment on ensuring, we've got a project called Inclusive Outreach Through Translation, which is about ensuring that the resources that we publish for this prize are inclusive according to ethnicity, gender, sexuality and socioeconomic background. One example that I can give is one of our Italian resources that was developed this year. The translator who developed that developed an activity around a Somali Italian poet. So the activity is still translating that really wonderful poem, but it brings in this context which the learners of Italian won't necessarily be aware of Italian colonization, the history of colonization, and sort of casts a light on that and brings that into the discussion alongside the translation activity. Yeah, I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much for listening.
That was great. Thank you so much, both of you. That was really lots of food for thought there around inclusivity and translation, and those lovely 5 premises that you started off with. One question that springs to mind for the third premise, which was languages can be more inclusive if they privilege culture and creativity over communication and function. One thought that sprung to my mind was, where would you recommend that teachers find inclusive texts which are promoting culture and creativity, which are age appropriate and have enough language for the students to hang their understanding on?
On the Stephen Spender Trust website. Right, okay. So no, I mean, I do think that there is there has been a lack of resources of this kind, and that's the reason that we do the work that we do. And we've really been focusing, especially since the beginning of the pandemic, on making sure that we develop resources that can just be used sort of directly in classrooms. As I was saying, that the translator doesn't have to be there, because before the pandemic, our work was a bit more around getting translators into schools. And so our website does have sort of downloadable, kind of ready to go resources. we're also developing a database of texts that we know work well for this kind of activity. So picture books, poems, extracts from novels, extracts from graphic novels, and for which the publisher is given permission for them to be used, because that's obviously an issue with this work. And then, of course, the publications that Pearson are doing with Lisa and the SIG are amazing examples. Otherwise, I'm not sure where else I would look.
Sure, but I think that can be the challenge, can't it? I'm sure lots of teachers want to use culturally inclusive texts. It's just not knowing necessarily where to find them easily. And as you say, there can be copyright issues as well. Yeah. But that's really interesting.
That is exactly what we hear from teachers whenever we present this work. That is exactly what we get back, is I would love to do more of this, but how do I find the text? How do I have the time? And so we've sort of taken that on as we consider that to be part of our role to do
That's
that.
Lovely. Thank you. We've got one more question as well from the chat. This is from Angela saying, are you going to include BSL at some point? It is the local language of a linguistic and cultural minority, and now the BSL Act has recognised it officially as a language of the UK. Any response to that question?
Yes, we've been thinking about this for a while. I think last year, for the first time, we actively encouraged entries to the Stephen Spender Prize of translations out of BSL poetry into English, so the same sort of direction that all of the translations go into. We haven't had very many entries yet, and so I think we need to do something much more targeted. And I don't know if you know the organisation Modern Poetry and Translation, but we do a lot of work with them, and they have just done had a whole BSL focus, and so we are now talking to them about how we can sort of use their experience and the expertise that they found to inform our own work. So it's really sort of on the table for us. We're just trying to figure out how to do it most effectively.
Lovely, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Charlotte and Stacie, for your input there. Superb. We're now going to move on to Gitanjali Patel, who's going to be talking to us about, again, inclusivity. Let me find my notes very quickly. No, it's all gone. Never mind. I'm going to hand over to Gitanjali Patel, who's going to tell us all about. Oh no, I've got it here. I'm sorry. About translation as a critical thinking pedagogy, rethinking inclusivity within secondary language education. It sounds amazing. Can't wait to hear some more about that. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Joe, and thanks for everyone, Joe and all the organisers for inviting me. I'm really honoured to be here alongside such great panellists, and also the other two panels of the last one was really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to the next one. So let me share my screen. Cool. So my name is Gitanjali, and I'm the director of an organisation called Shadow Heroes, and I'm also a Wolfson postgraduate scholar at the University of Birmingham. Shout out to my supervisor who's speaking on the next panel, Emanuele. And where my research focuses on translation as a critical pedagogy. So my work, both at Shadow Heroes and at Birmingham, addresses the fact that language learning in the UK does not reflect the dynamic and fluid linguistic reality of language users. A focus on standardized forms of English and Western European languages has developed a regime of linguistic and cultural value, which has the effect of minoritizing other languages, including deaf and disabled languages, and multilingual practices. So as Ophelia Garcia writes, and this is actually in relation to US education, but I think it's relevant here too, that language education programs respond to the nomenclature that we have created for named languages, languages that are seen to belong to nation states or social groups and not to people. So for the past 6 years, through Shadow Heroes and now through my PhD, I've been reflecting on and testing the idea that translation could be a powerful and transformative medium to teach secondary school students to interrogate contemporary power structures, to redress perceived language hierarchies, and to ethically engage with difference. So we support young people in embracing all sides of their linguistic and cultural heritages by engaging them in creative translation workshops, which explore issues of representation, self-expression, colonial history, and the relationship between language and power. So translation is the perfect medium through which to engage in these questions because it's a site of plurality and a form of cultural mediation, which allows us to both examine the world and our position within it. Our workshops cover 16 languages and are led by a collective of 14 fantastic women who are translators, writers, poets, and other artists, and the majority of whom are translators of color. And together we demonstrate how the ways in which we think about language can either reinforce or challenge norms of power. Our workshops help young people to think critically about what they read, watch, or listen to. They encourage questioning, boost confidence in young people's own stories, experiences, and skills, and their respect for those of others. We challenge Western European hegemonic languages by working primarily with languages and literatures from outside this region, by working with a range of different translators and source material and languages. We aim to center non-Western ways of knowing and being, to challenge the desire to converge on an easy, coherent story of a society or a country, and equip students with a toolkit for engaging with difference. I suppose the key point for us is that inclusivity is not just about what you include, but also what kind of materials you include, but how you engage students with those materials. So I'll talk you through our work in 6 parts. So, for example, one of our workshops, Electric Guitar Jakarta, is a workshop run by Indonesian writer, poet, and translator Khairani Baroka. This workshop has students embrace multisensorial modes of learning and creation in their translations of the song Aku Cinta Jakarta by Common Lennon. It aims to provide an alternative viewpoint on Indonesia that is against dominant orientalizing frameworks and against the essentializing of culture as monolithic. Indonesia is an important example in this respect, as it has hundreds of languages and cultures within its territories. Khairani exposes students to understandings of present-day Indonesia as a former British colony and to Indonesia as a colonizer itself within its territories. And in doing so, provides a framework for possibilities for both decolonial and anti-colonial translations. So we show that translation is also a way of knowing and understanding a tradition. So this workshop, Jugni Goes to the UK, is a workshop led by translator and writer Kavita Banhot. It looks at translation as a way of knowing and understanding a tradition. Through interrogating how the word Jugni is used in Punjabi music, students come to understand that the meaning of a word is not fixed, but rather reflects a context, a time of place, perspective, ideology, audience, or reader. So Jugni, it can be a necklace, a firefly, it can be an anti-colonial revolutionary, it can be an inner voice connecting us to God, or a narrative device commenting on the state of the world. Jugni can also mean a free-spirited woman who doesn't give a damn. So instead of giving answers, this workshop shows how a word can be interpreted in different ways and in different contexts, and how translation can encourage us to see the layers and complexities, to look deeper and reflect on our own processes of interpretation. Okay, so translation can also encourage us to think about the relationships between languages. So not all languages are valued equally in society, and this is something which is internalized by young people at schools, where, as I mentioned, the focus on Western European languages creates perceived hierarchy. Also, learning languages in silos, where languages like French or Spanish or German don't speak to each other, and are also learned in their most standard forms. This has the effect of framing languages as bounded entities rather than fluid, complex, and dynamic ones. So we highlight this fact through our source material. So this quote by Sema Kaigasus, who is talking about her novel, Every Fire You Tend, which is translated by Nicholas Glastonbury. She writes, "I'm not a Muslim writer or a Turkish writer. I call myself a Turkish language writer. And this is not a homogenized language. It contains Arabic, Greek, Farsi, Spanish, Armenian, Kurdish. If you speak with a Turkish nationalist, you realize they don't speak real Turkish. They don't know Turkish, just a very narrow version of it. The Turkish of every fire you tend refuses this. So we also show that translation shows the richness of and the relationships within languages. So this workshop, Translating Political Satire from Egypt, is a workshop led by Dr. Reem Abu Al-Fadl, who's a translator and senior lecturer at SOAS. And this workshop captures the richness of Arabic with its formal form and diverse dialects. And it asks students to translate a satirical song by protest artists from 1970s Egypt. Students tackle challenges of how to creatively render irony, ridicule, parody, and caricature, and discover how the use of satire and popular culture can amplify mass grievances. This workshop also aims for students to unlearn assumptions and preconceptions they might have had about the Arab world and its associations, and learn values of empathy and solidarity. So another workshop that we run is called A Luta Continua, Translating Portugal's Colonial Past, which is led by writer and translator Jovanka Paquete-Perdigão. And this workshop shows how translation can enable a richer understanding of history. So history can be constructed, assembled, edited, erased, and written for a purpose. It's therefore not necessarily comfortable, fair, or inclusive. So in this workshop, students discover Portugal and its colonial past through songs and translation. They see what Crioulo, a language spoken in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, can reveal about Portugal's history. And by comparing two contrasting accounts of the colonial experience in Portuguese Africa by translating two songs from Portuguese and Bissau-Guinean Crioulo, students can learn to appreciate why history matters and why it matters who gets to write it. And finally, we show that translation is also about collaboration and creative play. So through our collaborator collective and through our teaching methods, we encourage students to embrace values of non-judgmental co-creation, mutual respect, and dialogic relationships. They work together through solutions, reflect on assumptions, and reframe the way they view difference and each other. So this workshop, Keeping Your Eye on the Dragon Ball, is run by Yuka Harada Pa, and it's all about translating Japanese anime. So students compare Japanese and American trailers of the same film and discuss the politics of dubbing and how dubbing into English often relies on Anglophone stereotypes of Japanese culture. So they translate this trailer for Dragon Ball and record their own dubbed version, which I can send you the link for because I don't have time to show it now. So I suppose these are just some quotes. So from teachers and students. I'm actually just going to move to my conclusion now because of time. So the main purpose of my short presentation is to highlight the need to go deeper. Language ideologies have the effect of creating and maintaining and reproducing structures of hegemonic power, and these are usually imposed on populations through schooling. Our aim is for students to develop critical awareness of these ideologies and apply the critical and decolonial frameworks they learn in our workshops to their own lives and education and further, if they would like to go on further. We believe that translation provides a unique and creative and multifaceted way to move beyond traditional notions of inclusivity as superficial tick box approaches and to decolonize curricular mindsets and develop core values of solidarity and social responsibility. Thank you.
You're muted, Joe. You're muted.
Sorry, my apologies. Yeah, boys school error. Never mind. Sorry about that. Have you right? So great question here from Charlotte. First of all, thank you so much, Gitanjali, for your presentation. Apologies for being muted. So a question from Charlotte: have you found that school English departments are open to this work, and/or have you done workshops as a collaboration between MFL and English departments?
Yeah, so we actually present our workshops as more of a whole school solution. And because of the way that translation and language learning is used, usually that the point of entry is language departments, and they're the ones who are sort of most receptive to like an initial email because of the word translation and the inclusion of translation in modern languages curriculum. But actually that's sort of just almost like a gateway, and we just speak to them. We've done quite a lot of workshops with English departments and also classics. But actually, as we sort of develop more relationships with more schools, we're moving towards working with entire year groups. And one of our board members works at a school in Totteridge, and I think that was the idea, that we were going to run workshops for the whole year, because I really believe that these kinds of workshops, they're an interdisciplinary workshop. They don't fit neatly into any subject boundary, and they're applicable to all subjects. And so yes to having worked with English departments, and essentially I think that these workshops are definitely more suited to a whole school solution.
Lovely, thank you so much. I'm very aware of time, so I think we'll move on to Lucy's session, if that's okay. So as Lucy can't be with us today, Lucy very kindly has shared a video which we're going to play in a moment. So Lucy's going to be talking about international languages in secondary schools in Wales. Why don't learners choose languages, and how can mentoring provoke change? So if we watch the video now, and then we'll have time for another couple of questions, I think, after that. Great, over to you to run the video. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Today I'm going to talk to you about international languages in secondary schools in Wales, and we're going to consider why students don't choose languages, and perhaps consider as well how we might be able to change this. I'm going to refer a lot to a project called MFL Mentoring. And that's because I am the programme manager of MFL Mentoring, based at Cardiff University. But as you'll come to see, it's a partnership between a number of universities in Wales, which is only growing. So there you've got my contact details, our website as well, www.mflmentoring.co.uk, and our relevant Twitter handles. So do feel free to get some more information from those areas, because I'm not going to be able to cover too much in just 10 minutes. So just a little roadmap for this 10-minute or so presentation. First, I'm going to set the scene, look briefly at national uptake. I think we'll all have a good idea of that. Look very briefly at the project that I lead, MFL Mentoring. Then we're going to move on very swiftly to look at the learner data, because that's where we really need to be focused in order to understand what's going wrong with languages, I think, and where there is possibility for change. So that's where I'm going to come to in the third part in my conclusions. So just to set the scene, as we are all thoroughly aware, uptake of GCSE languages is not looking very good across the UK. But here in Wales, we really are looking to be in quite a sorry situation, despite all the incredible efforts that have taken place, not least by the Partners of Global Futures, under which our programme falls, but by teachers on the ground who really we take our hats off to. So what we do see from the statistics, and these are qualification entries at the age of 16, so GCSE entries, is that uptake is declining on average by 2% a year, okay? That's a really quick decline, actually. And what we are seeing is that rate of decline is actually increasing. So what we've seen between 2015 and 2021 is a 33% drop in entries. The result is only 4,625 learners were entered for a GCSE in an MFL, and that accounts for only 14.4% of all learners, okay? So that is a fall on 2020, a fall on 2019. It is a continuing trend and pattern of annual reduction in numbers. The same is mirrored in A-level uptake, and some of the work that we've done suggests that it is a direct result of those declines at GCSE. We see a 57% drop in entries over the 10-year period 2011 to 2021, only 387 entries in 2021, although that does represent a slight increase from 2020, and there are a number of reasons that might have come about, with only 3.6 of all A-level learners opting to study for an MFL in 2021. And what we do see is that the retention rate between GCSE and A-level is very, very low at about 8%. So yeah, fluctuations are definitely really, really core in this area because of the very tiny numbers that we're looking at, but those trends are replicated and quite clear, I think, for us all to see. So MFL mentoring, hopefully most of you are familiar with our program. We are very much about inspiring young people to study international languages by using the most inspirational people that we have available to us, our undergraduate and postgraduate students from across all our partner universities. We send them into secondary schools across Wales to work with small groups of people, young children aged between 12 and 14, who have indicated that they are not interested in languages, to get them to think about how languages are relevant and relate to them. Okay, so it's all about the diversity of languages and cultures, about celebrating it and about saying, hey, look, the world is here in Wales and we need to make it visible and we need to shout about it and we need to understand that we are all in our own way, in our own space, linked to those multiple languages and multiple cultures. We are a partnership between lots of different universities. We are expanding, and we've worked with over 140 secondary schools across Wales, which is really fantastic. A lot of those on a repeated basis. And we see between 40 and 45% of those that are mentored opting for a GCSE, which is a stat to celebrate, really, given that we are looking at a national uptake of 14.4%. So what I really wanted to think about here was, why aren't learners choosing languages? And what gives us a lot of insight into this is a learner survey that we put out every single year to all of the learners that might be able to participate in MFL mentoring. So you can see here that that's year 8 and year 9 learners, although predominantly year 9 learners. And for this survey, we got 5,803 responses. So this is a really significant data set. You can also see there in the graph to the right on my side that the medium of schools that are represented in this survey, which includes 64 secondary schools across Wales, are replicable of the medium of education delivered throughout Wales. So what I really wanted to draw attention to here was that learners were asked in this question to indicate whether they wanted to take an international language at GCSE level. You can see here, definitely yes, probably yes, maybe, probably not, definitely not. And there is clear bias towards those bottom 3 areas. But what I really wanted to actually emphasize here is not that this is a really desolate situation, but that actually 32% of all learners indicated that they may take an international language for GCSE, with 16% indicating that they definitely or probably would. So I want us to actually think about what that means. That means that 48% of our learners are potentially open to languages. So why are we only getting 14.4% to follow through? I think some of these are well known, well understood, but what might surprise you is some of the ones that haven't ranked quite as highly as we might have expected. So this table shows where the respondents, of which there are 2,965 represented in this table, what the children responded to the question, what stops you taking international languages for GCSE? The top ranking there, it's boring. Second, I want to take something else more. Third, I'm not good at it. 4, I don't need it for the job I want. And 5, it's too difficult. Surprisingly, we don't see that learners are suggesting to us that it's because they're already taking Welsh, that it's because they don't have enough option choices, which we often talk about, or because their friends are doing it, so that peer pressure element. So I think it's a really interesting insight into why learners interpret they aren't making those decisions. In terms of the motivations for international languages, I think this is really stark because we see a really high percentage, higher than the barriers for the motivations. 79% saying it's useful, so there's a utility element. 60% saying they want to travel, 60% saying it will help me get a job, very interesting, 56% saying it's fun, and 45% saying that it's because they're good at it. So I think they're really interesting things for us to think about and reflect on in terms of motivations, the drivers for wanting to study an international language, and how we can mobilise those to really incentivise. Here we ask learners to rank the subjects, 13 subjects that are listed here: English, art, PE, history, IT, science, math, geography, drama, music, international languages, RE or RS, and Welsh. And we ask them to rank them from their favourite to their least favourite. So 1 being their most favourite and 13 being their least favourite. I think this, again, is a really stark reminder to us of the contrasting feelings around languages. English is ranked top. It is the favourite out of this response from 5,755 learners. Welsh is the least favourite. And international languages sits at 11th, so it's not very far from the bottom. So I think we really need to think about that as a quite confusing picture about attitudes towards languages. And what we see here is when students were asked about how they would rank international languages in comparison to other subjects, so it builds on the last question, and where students actually placed international languages, we see that a whopping 30% of learners placed international languages as 11th, 12th, or 13th out of their favourite subjects. So a really large proportion are not enjoying them, is what we see there. In terms of difficulty, now I think this is a really interesting one. Surprisingly, 43% of learners considered international languages less difficult than other subjects. Now, in our subject, we talk a lot about difficulty. So I thought that this was really, really poignant in terms of those motivating factors and thinking about why students do or do not study languages. So actually, are they always thinking that it's the main barrier is difficulty? That table that I showed you a few slides back suggests that there are a number of different things, of which difficulty is potentially one, but not the predominant factor. And then we've got here, how much do you enjoy your international languages lessons, maths, science, English, and Welsh? And what we see is that Welsh is the least enjoyed, English is the most enjoyed, and that international languages sits below maths and science, but above Welsh. So again, a really interesting picture of how all of these subjects fit together, which allows us to think about how we might draw on subjects and pedagogies in other areas to entice young people into our subject. And here, this is specific to Wales, although learning English and learning international language is specific to all of us in the UK. How much did our learners agree that learning Welsh or English would help them to learn an international language? 42% agreed or strongly agreed that English helped them with international languages, but only 28% agreed that Welsh helped. So I think that's a really telling story here in Wales about the relationship between Welsh, English, and international languages. Okay, I have absolutely flown through all of that data. There is a report available on the website that we can pop in the chat as well. But I just wanted to highlight some key conclusions, really, although we can dedicate a lot of the discussion to this too. So just to say that MFL mentoring targets those that are undecided. So with 32% of respondents indicating uncertainty, and those 16% indicating the definitely yes and probably yes, although we are unlikely to work with them because of the nature of the project, which is to really kind of provide that conversion from uncertainty to certainty. It does show that there is a huge potential to inspire people to make that positive choice. We take a really interdisciplinary approach towards international languages. So we try to bring every subject into it: maths, science, RS, history, art. languages lend themselves to this interdisciplinary approach. And I think the more that we can actually bring that to the forefront, the more we can build on that excitement and that enthusiasm that exists in other subject areas. And finally, and I think this is a really key one for us in Wales as we forge and kind of blazon the way forward with the curriculum for Wales, we're very, very keen on making links between international languages, all languages, not just French, German and Spanish, with English and with Welsh. And the more that we can harness that positive attitude actually that we're seeing towards English, that ranking of #1 for enjoyment for English, the more that we can I think highlight to our learners the interrelations, the connections, the differences and the similarities, the better we can make the case for languages in a language that speaks to the learner. So I think there's loads to think about there, and I hope it's given you some food for thought. But for us, we think it's such an enormous data set, the largest that we know of, taken specifically from learners, and I think it really gives us food for thought moving forward. So yeah, I hope you very much enjoyed that short presentation.
Fantastic. That was really lovely, really interesting stats there. Claire, I was wondering if I could talk a little bit about the 32% of the people that may take the GCSE, and Lucy there was talking about the greatest potential for uplift. With the mentors, with the mentoring project, which personally I think is absolutely fabulous that you're doing this. I think it's wonderful. What have you found have been the key factors for maximising that uplift? Is it the relations that the mentors have with the mentees? Do they see them as, you know, more relevant? Maybe they're younger in age. Is that one of the main ways in which you can take advantage of this uplift?
I've got my colleague Becky Beckley here as well, who's on the project.
Oh, sorry.
But I'm happy to take the first part. I think from all of our research, Joe, we have done a lot of research. It's a project that's very much an applied research project. What we've found is the near-peer mentor model is very effective. So if John, age 22, has been to Barcelona for his year abroad and come and talk to Jordan and Peter and Dan, who are 14, about doing Spanish and can talk about those experiences and the value of that as part of his life experience, we've found that incredibly powerful. We've also found that actually putting an undergraduate student or a postgrad into some of the very disadvantaged areas of Wales gives aspiration to want to go to university, gives aspiration to want to be that young person, and maybe to, if one would wish, to change one's life course. So we find that inspirational role model and that connectivity through language learning, and we encourage our mentors to talk about the mistakes they make in French, German and Spanish, to actually be honest about the languages and how they learn them. We found that's very, very powerful. So we find that it's that young person in that classroom or on the screen with that life experience that they bring to the fore, they bring themselves into the picture. We find that incredibly powerful. If you want to come in here, Becky.
We also don't focus particularly on the big 3 languages taught in secondary schools. We want to harness the enthusiasm and interest that the pupils have in any language. And quite often the pupils would say they're not interested in languages, but when you actually start a dialogue with them, you find they are interested in languages, just not the ones that are taught in their school. So it's kind of tapping into this interest, finding the intrinsic motivation and showing actually what the language learning that takes place in school is a springboard and the start of a journey to learning other languages as well. We also run awards and recognition ceremonies with our partner universities where the pupils have chance to come into the university. So when Claire was talking about raising aspirations, a lot of the pupils that we work with don't have parents that have gone to university. They may live 20 minutes down the road from a city where there is a university, but they might not have been to the city, let alone the actual university. So when we talk about it being aspirational, it truly is, and they're guided around the university by their mentor. It's a really special relationship, and we keep coming back to the fact it's not teaching. If your teacher tells you, oh, you should do a GCSE, the pupils will just turn around and go, well, you would say that, you're my teacher. This is somebody different, someone who has chosen to do it, and they're given a window to these pupils into their world and their journeys. So it's a lot about that. We talk about journey in the time when we talk about X factor and things like that, but when it's a journey when we talk about mentoring as well. Yeah,
that's amazing. I think you're doing brilliant work. I wish that there was piloting. I know there was a a pilot in Sheffield, I think, wasn't there in England? But I just wish that it was piloted more in England as well. I think it's inspirational what you're doing. Thank you so much. I'm very aware of time as well. I just wanted to do one more question. We've had lots of lovely questions, but unfortunately we've run out of time to a certain extent. So I'm just going to do one question, if that's okay. Is there right? So this question is that's what. Yeah. Can I ask how you see the new resources that we've talked about today interacting with the recent reforms in the GCSE? Would anyone like to answer to that, if that's okay? Anyone at all who's spoken already? How do these resources or what we're talking about impact on the new GCSE?
Joe, are you talking about that in England? Because there is going to be radical curriculum change in Wales. And actually, I have to say, hand on heart, thank God, because it's not going the way of the GCSE in England. It's going to a very, very different, a much more creative approach, was our understanding. So not the very strong focus on grammar, phonics and vocabulary lists. So just for you to be aware, Joe, that there is quite clear bifurcation about languages in Wales and languages in England. So I think we need to be quite clear that there is not the same ideology across the UK.
Thank you for clarifying. So I was particularly thinking of the new GCSE in England. But anyone, Lisa, would you like to make a comment?
I mean, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I mean, to leave to one side what I think is really dreadfully tragic sidestepping of literature, which I think would be a really literature is a fantastic opportunity, as we've heard, literature in its broadest sense to make our curricula rich and enriching and inclusive. But I'd say one opportunity that reforms present, of course, is the redesign of course books and resources. So we have here an exciting opportunity, and I know lots of publishers are engaging with anti-racist organisations. Well, I know Oxford University Press is certainly consulting on inclusivity in their new resources, and that's something that can be positive from it. Yeah.
Well, finishing on that positive note, I'd like to thank all the wonderful speakers this afternoon in the panel session, giving all your different insights on decolonising the languages curriculum, giving some really practical tips, as well as some people to get in contact with to find out more, to get involved. Thank you so much to the organisers as well for this opportunity, and to give us the opportunity to talk about these really important issues from a school's context. It's been a real pleasure, and without further ado, I'm going to hand back to Charles now, if that's okay. But thank you, everybody. It's been lovely.
Thank you so much indeed, and thank you, Joe. That was a fantastic session.